A champagne flute shattered against the gravel. The laughter came next, loud and ugly and mean, rolling across the whole fairgrounds. A man lifted his glass high and said the word out loud, "Fat." He said it to the crowd, not to her, in broad daylight, and the crowd laughed harder. She stood there in her best blue dress, one hand pressed flat against her stomach, her face burning red. Nobody moved to help. Nobody said a thing. Her name was Delilah Voss, and 30 seconds ago she thought this was her engagement party. Then she turned. Not toward the exit. She walked the other way, straight across the fairgrounds, toward the one man everybody there was afraid of. The scarred cowboy nobody dared approach, the one they called Ghost. What she did when she reached him left 200 people frozen in silence. Stay with me on this one. Now let me back up. Because to understand what she did, you have to understand who she was and who she thought she loved. Delilah Voss cooked for the whole Copper Gulch Ranch, and she'd done it for 6 years. 50 hungry hands, 3 meals a day, roundup season and blizzard season, and everything in between. Nobody outworked her. She was up at 4 to get the biscuits going and scrubbing the last pot at 9 at night. And I don't mean she just fed them. I mean she knew every one of those men. She knew which ones took their coffee black and which ones had a sweet tooth they were ashamed of. She knew which ones got quiet around the holidays because home was a long way off. The men on that ranch loved her the way you love the person who keeps you alive out there. She fed them when they were sick. She sat with them when they got word from home. When young Tommy Rourke broke his leg under a horse, it was Delilah who sat up 3 nights running so his mother back east wouldn't worry. She was the beating heart of that place, and everybody knew it. Everybody except Cole Ashby. Cole was the foreman. Tall, easy smile, the kind of good-looking that gets a man a long way before anybody notices there's nothing behind it. He'd come to Copper Gulch 2 years back with a firm handshake and a lot of talk, and inside a month he was running the outfit and dating the cook. Folks wondered about that at first. A man like Cole could have had his pick. But Cole was smart. Cole never did anything by accident, and Delilah couldn't believe her luck. A man like Cole wanting a woman like her. That was the story she told herself over and over while she rolled out dough in the dark. A man like that wanting a woman like me. You hear it already, don't you? The way she said it, like she was the lucky one, like she owed him something for looking her way. And that right there, that was the crack Cole slid himself into. Here's the thing about Delilah. She was heavy, yes. She'd been a big girl her whole life, and the ranch kitchen hadn't made her smaller. Kids had been cruel about it in school, and grown men crueler in the years after. And somewhere along the way, she decided the safest thing was to make herself useful enough that nobody would bother to be mean. If you feed a man, maybe he won't laugh at you. That was the deal she'd made with the world. But she was also the warmest person for 100 miles, and she had a laugh that made grown men grin into their coffee, and she never once walked past a person in trouble. Cole never saw any of that. What Cole saw was a woman who'd say yes. A woman who'd been told she wasn't worth much for so long that a handsome man's attention felt like a miracle she'd better not question. A woman who'd cook the books at the ranch office without asking why. And here's the part that mattered most to Cole. A woman whose grandfather, old Harlan Voss, happened to hold the paper on 800 acres of the best grazing land in the county. But Delilah didn't know any of that yet. All she knew was that Cole had asked her to marry him on the porch in June, down on one knee with the sun going down, and she'd cried and said yes. She wrote the date inside her Bible. She started saving for a dress. So they threw a party. County Fair weekend, biggest crowd of the year. Cole insisted on doing it out at the fairgrounds in front of everybody. Delilah thought that was romantic. A man so proud of her he wanted the whole county to see. She wore the blue dress she'd saved 3 months to buy and got her hair done in town, sat in that beauty parlor chair feeling foolish and hopeful all at once, and she walked into that party feeling, for once in her life, like the belle of the ball. And across the fairgrounds near the livestock pens, one man wasn't watching the party at all. They called him Ghost. Ryder McCabe, if you ask the old-timers, but nobody used that name anymore. He was a bull rider, or he had been, back before the wreck that put the long white scar down the side of his face and took most of the sound out of his left ear. There'd been a rumor for years that a man died in the chute the night Ghost got hurt, and that Ghost had something to do with it. Nobody knew if it was true. Nobody asked. That was the thing about Ghost. He never explained himself, so people filled the silence with the worst story they could think of. And people always do that, don't they? They'd rather have a monster they understand than a quiet man they don't. He kept to himself, worked the rough stock, and lived alone out past the river with a one-horned longhorn steer named Bandit that followed him around like a dog. Mothers pulled their kids close when Ghost walked by. Men gave him a wide berth at the bar. Storekeepers watched his hands. 200 people at that fair, and there was a 10-foot circle of empty space around him at all times, like danger had a shape and he was standing inside it. Delilah was maybe the only person in the county who'd ever spoken to him kindly. One winter morning a year back, she'd found him half frozen and out of gas on the county road at dawn, hunched over the wheel of a dead truck with his breath fogging the glass. Anybody else would have driven on by. She didn't. She stopped and handed him her thermos of coffee without a single word about who he was supposed to be. Didn't ask about the scar. Didn't ask about the rumor. Just poured him a cup and said the roads were mean this time of year and did he need a lift to the station. He looked at her like nobody had done a plain, kind thing for him in a decade. Maybe nobody had. She never thought about it again. He thought about it every day. Now here's the part that matters, the part nobody at that party knew. All summer, Delilah had been finding peaches on her kitchen windowsill. Fresh ones, perfect ones. 3 or 4 at a time, set out neat in the gray light before dawn, before she was even up. She figured it was one of the ranch hands being sweet. She never caught who, and Lord knows she tried, up before 4 most mornings anyway. She'd bite into one over the sink and smile and think, somebody out there's looking out for me. Somebody was. She just had the wrong somebody in her heart. The party got going around 4. There was a keg and a fiddle and folding tables of her own food, because of course Cole had asked her to cook her own engagement party, and of course she'd said yes. Never even thought to be insulted by it. She was refilling the lemonade when Cole climbed up on a hay wagon and called for everyone's attention. Delilah's heart lifted. This is it, she thought. He's going to say something sweet. Cole raised his glass. He looked out at the crowd, grinned that easy grin, and said, "Y'all know why we're here. I'm getting married." The crowd cheered. Then Cole waited for it to die down, and his grin turned into something else. "Thing is," he said, "a man's gotta be honest with himself. And I've been doing some hard thinking about what I'm actually signing up for." Delilah stood there with the lemonade pitcher in her hand. Something cold started up in her stomach. "I mean, look at her," Cole said, and he pointed, right at her. 200 heads turned. "Sweet girl, cooks like an angel. But a man's got eyes, don't he?" He patted his own belly and puffed his cheeks out, and somebody laughed, and once one person laughed, the rest felt safe too. Let's just say there's a lot to love. A whole lot. That's when he said the word, fat, loud so the back rows could hear it. And then he lifted his glass higher and said the thing that broke it. "So here's to trading up." And he reached down and pulled a woman up onto the wagon beside him, Brandy Kay from the feed store, thin as a fence rail, and kissed her right there in front of everyone at Delilah's own engagement party. The champagne flute slipped out of somebody's hand and shattered on the gravel, and the laughing started for real. Delilah stood alone in her blue dress with 200 people laughing at her, and her whole body went hot and her eyes started to sting. All those years of making herself useful so nobody would be cruel, all of it, wasted in one afternoon in front of the whole county. Everybody was waiting for her to run, to cover her face and bolt for the parking lot and give them the ending they wanted. She set the lemonade pitcher down on the table, real slow, real careful. And then she turned and walked the other way. Nobody understood it at first. She wasn't heading for the road. She was walking deeper into the fairgrounds, past the pens, straight and steady in those good shoes, her chin up and her jaw set. The laughing kind of stumbled and died as people tried to figure out where she was going. Cole up on the wagon stopped mid-kiss. "Dell," he called, "where you going, girl?" She didn't answer him. She had her eyes fixed on one point across the fairgrounds, on the tall, scarred man standing alone by the far fence, brushing down a one-horned steer, the only person at that whole fair who hadn't laughed. Ghost had gone still the second Cole said the word. He'd set his brush down on the rail. His jaw had gone tight and his hand had closed slow around the top rail of the pen, and for 1 second something dark had moved behind those pale eyes, but he didn't step forward. It wasn't his place, and he knew it. And now he was watching this heavy woman in a blue dress walk across the dirt toward him with 200 people staring, and I promise you, he did not know what was about to happen any more than they did. She stopped in front of him. Up close he was even bigger, and the scar was worse, and his eyes were the palest gray you ever saw. A lifetime of people flinching had taught him to hold real still around strangers, so he held still now. Delilah reached up with both hands and grabbed him by the collar of his shirt, and she kissed him, hard, full on the mouth in front of God and Cole Ashby and every soul at the Copper Gulch Fair. You could have heard a pin drop in that dirt, the fiddle scratched out. Somebody's beer can hit the ground. 200 people stood frozen with their mouths open, because the fat girl they'd just been laughing at had walked across the whole fairgrounds and kissed the most dangerous man in the county like she meant it. And Ghost, who hadn't been touched gently by another human being in longer than he could remember, brought one big scarred hand up slow and rested it against the small of her back. Careful, like she was made of something that mattered. For a second, the whole world held its breath. Then Delilah pulled back an inch. Her eyes were wet and her hands were shaking on his collar, and she whispered, just to him, "I'm sorry. I didn't have anybody else." And Ghost looked down at her, and in a voice like gravel that maybe 6 people had ever heard, he said, "You do now." And just like that, the noise came back. Cole was climbing down off the wagon, red in the face. The crowd was buzzing, but Ghost stepped a half step in front of Delilah, easy and calm, and put himself between her and all of it, and for one strange, quiet moment, standing in the shadow of that big man and his one-horned steer, Delilah felt something she hadn't felt at her own party. She felt safe. Her heart slowed down. Her hands quit shaking. She thought the worst thing that was going to happen to her that day had already happened, and now all that was left was to go home and cry and start over. She was wrong. "Get your hands off my woman." The words cut across the fairgrounds. Cole had shoved his way through the crowd and he was standing 10 feet off, and he wasn't grinning anymore. He had a beer bottle in his hand, held down low by his leg, the way a man holds a thing he's thinking about using. Brandy was gone. The joke was gone. What was left on Cole's face was something meaner, because Cole Ashby had just been made a fool of in front of the whole county, and that was a thing his pride could not survive. "She ain't your woman," Ghost said, quiet. "She's my property," Cole said, "till I say she ain't. And here's where it stopped being about pride." Because Cole pointed that bottle at Delilah and said the thing that changed everything. "And so's every acre that old fool Harlan signed over to the ranch account. You think I've been out here for the biscuits, Dell?" The crowd went dead quiet again, but a different kind of quiet now. The kind where 200 people all realize at once they've been watching the wrong story the whole time. Delilah felt the floor drop out of her. "What did you say?" Cole laughed, but it was ugly. "Your granddaddy's land, 800 acres. It's sitting in the ranch operating account under my signature, sweetheart, because you signed it there. Last spring. Those papers I told you were feed contracts." He shrugged. "You'd sign anything I put in front of you. All I had to do was smile and tell you I loved you. That's the only reason I stayed." "You really think a man marries something like you for love?" You hear that? That's the whole story turning under your feet. It was never a broken heart. It was a robbery. This man hadn't just humiliated her. He'd spent 2 years stealing her grandfather's land right out from under her, using her own trust as the crowbar, and now that she'd embarrassed him in public, he was done pretending. The insults, the party, the girl on the wagon, that wasn't cruelty for its own sake. That was a man burning the evidence. And here's where I've got to stop and say, if you're still with me, if your blood is up the way mine is telling this, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button right now. Because what Ghost McCabe did next is the reason I've been wanting to tell you this story all week. Stay right here. Delilah couldn't breathe. "Grandpa Harlan trusted you," she said. "He's dying, Cole. He signed those because you told him you'd take care of me. You sat at his bedside. You held his hand." "And I would have taken care of you," Cole said, "long as you stayed useful, long as you kept your mouth shut and your head down, but you just made me a laughingstock in front of my own outfit." He took a step. "So here's how it's gonna go. You're gonna come back over here, you're gonna smile, and you're gonna tell everybody this was a joke, that you set the whole thing up. Or come Monday, I file the transfer and you and your dying granddaddy have got nothing. No land, no ranch, no kitchen, nothing but each other and a cardboard box." He smiled. "Your choice, fat girl." Now, 200 people watched Delilah Voss stand there in her blue dress and realized she'd been played for a fool for 2 whole years, and they waited again for her to break. But Ghost McCabe wasn't watching Delilah. Ghost was watching Cole's hand, the one with the bottle. "You signed feed contracts," Ghost said, and it wasn't a question. Everybody turned. It was the most words anybody'd heard him say in years, and the strangest thing was how steady they came. "In the ranch office, spring roundup, 2nd week of April." "What's it to you, Scarface?" Cole spat. "'Cause I was there," Ghost said, "mending the corral out back that whole week." Window was open. He reached slow into his shirt pocket and took out a folded, dog-eared piece of paper, soft from being carried a long time. "You read a thing out loud to her, real friendly. 'Feed and supplement,' you said, 'signed here, initial there.' But the header said land transfer, deed of. I can read upside down through a window just fine." He held the paper up. "So I copied down the document number and the date, and it didn't sit right. So 3 months ago, I mailed a note to old Harlan Voss's lawyer up in Billings, asking him to pull that document and look it over real careful." He glanced at Delilah just for a second. "On account of somebody ought to look out for her, and I figured it wasn't gonna be you." "The peaches," she thought it the second he said it. "The peaches on the windowsill. It was you. All along it was you." Cole's face had gone white. "You're bluffing. You can't even prove you were there." "Lawyer wrote me back last week," Ghost said. "It's in my truck in an envelope with the county seal on it. The transfer's flagged. Fraudulent inducement, he called it. Signature obtained under false pretense from a woman and a sick old man who was told a lie about what he was signing." He tucked the paper away. "You don't own one blade of grass, Ashby. You never did. And come Monday, it ain't Delilah who's got nothing, it's you. Plus, whatever the sheriff wants to talk to you about once he hears the word fraud." For a long second Cole just stood there, and you could see it all coming apart behind his eyes. 2 years of work, the land, the whole con, gone, exposed by a scarred man he'd never once bothered to look at. Then he did the thing men like Cole always do when the talking stops working. He came off his heel fast and swung that bottle at Ghost's scarred head with everything he had. Ghost didn't even look surprised. He caught Cole's wrist in one big hand an inch from his face, just caught it, out of the air, like a man catching a slow ball tossed by a child and squeezed, and the bottle dropped and rolled in the dirt. Cole yelped. Ghost turned him around by the arm, calm as anything, no more bothered than if he was moving a gate, walked him 3 steps and set him down face first over the rail of the steer pen, and held him there with one hand flat on his back while Cole kicked and cussed and got nowhere at all. "Easy," Ghost said, not to Cole, to Bandit, because the one-horned steer had swung his big head around and lowered that single horn at the man thrashing in his pen, breathing hard through his nose, and Ghost, still holding Cole down with one hand, reached over and patted the steer's neck with the other. "He ain't worth the trouble, boy. He ain't worth your horn." That's when the sheriff got there. Somebody'd run for him when the bottle came out. 2 deputies took hold of Cole, and Ghost let go and stepped back easy, hands open where everybody could see them, and Cole was screaming about assault, about how everybody saw it, how that scarred freak jumped him for no reason. The sheriff looked at 200 witnesses. 200 witnesses looked back, and not one of them, not one, said a word to help Cole Ashby. Same crowd that laughed at Delilah 10 minutes before. Funny how fast a man can go from the one everybody wants to stand next to the one nobody will meet in the eye. "Boys were on the corral all week, Sheriff. I saw 'em," an old rancher finally said, hat in his hands, nodding at Ghost. "And if this fella's saying there's papers, then there's papers. I'll say what I know about it. And I 'spect Miss Voss will too." The sheriff looked at Delilah. "Ma'am, you want to tell me about these documents?" And Delilah, who an hour ago couldn't have said boo to a fly, who'd spent her whole life saying yes and thank you and I'm sorry, wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and stood up straight in her blue dress and said, "Yes, sir, I surely do, every word of it." Her voice didn't shake, not once. "He told my dying grandfather he loved me. He took his land with a lie. And he called me fat in front of my whole town today to cover it up, to make me small enough that nobody would believe me if I ever did figure it out." She looked right at Cole. "You want to know the worst part, Cole? I'd have given you the land. If you'd just been kind to me, I'd have handed you every acre and thanked you for taking it." She shook her head slow. "But you never wanted a single thing I actually had to give." They led Cole Ashby out of that fairground in cuffs, and the whole crowd parted to let him through, and nobody laughed. Nobody said a word. Brandy Kay had already got in her car and gone, gravel spitting under her tires. It came out over the next few weeks, all of it. The lawyer in Billings had the whole paper trail, and once the sheriff started pulling threads, it just kept unspooling. Cole had done it before. 2 counties over under a different name, found a lonely person with land and a soft heart and worked his way in slow, patient, over a year or 2 until the deed was signed. The transfer got voided clean. Harlan Voss kept every acre. Cole took a plea and did his time, and last anybody heard he was a long way from Montana and not coming back, and good riddance. But that's the courtroom stuff. That's not the part that makes you cry. Let me tell you the part that does. That evening, after the deputies were gone and the crowd had thinned out and the sun was going down gold over the mountains, Delilah found Ghost back at the pen, brushing Bandit like nothing at all had happened. Like he hadn't just handed her whole life back to her in front of the entire county. She stood there a while before she spoke. "It was you," she said finally. "The peaches." Ghost kept brushing. The scar on his face had gone soft in the low light. "Got a tree out back of my place," he said. "Old one. My mother planted it before she passed. Puts out more than one man could ever eat." He was quiet a moment, the brush moving slow. "You gave me your coffee that winter morning. Didn't ask who I was first. Didn't ask about none of it. Nobody's done that in a long time." He shrugged those big shoulders. "Didn't figure you'd want peaches from the likes of me if I knocked on the door. So I just left 'em before light, where you'd find 'em." Delilah started to cry then, not the ugly, humiliated crying from before, the other kind, the kind that comes when somebody's finally gentle with you. All summer, she said, you watched over me all summer. You knew what coal was, and you didn't say a word to me. Why didn't you just tell me? Would you have believed me? Ghost said, and there wasn't a bit of meanness in it, just truth. Big scarred fella nobody trusts walks up and tells you the handsome foreman's a thief. You'd have run from me and married him quicker. He set the brush down on the rail. Weren't my place to say, was my place to be ready, in case. So I got the papers looked at and I waited and I kept my mouth shut and I hoped I was wrong about him. He looked down at the dirt. You never needed saving, Delilah. You walked across that whole fairground on your own 2 feet, with the whole town laughing. I just didn't want you walking to nobody who wasn't worth it. His voice dropped. Reckon I wasn't sure I was worth it neither. She crossed the space between them and took his big scarred hand in both of hers, the same hand that had caught a bottle out of the air and patted a steer's neck in the very same minute. You want to know what everybody in that town got wrong about you, she said. They looked at that scar and decided you were the most dangerous man in the county. She lifted his hand and held it against her cheek. And they were right. You are, because you're the only one who ever saw me, really saw me, not the cook. Not the fat girl, me. And that's the most dangerous thing there, is to a woman who spent her whole life trying to be invisible, so nobody would hurt her. Ghost McCabe, who a whole county was afraid of, closed his eyes and leaned his forehead down against hers, and this huge man, this ghost everybody crossed the street to avoid, just about came apart standing up. They got married the following spring, out at the old ranch under Harlan's cottonwoods. The same men who'd stood silent at that party stood up for her at the wedding, hats in their hands. Old Harlan lived long enough to give her away in his wheelchair with tears running down into his white beard, and he gripped Ghost's arm on the way and said, "You keep leaving her peaches, son. Every summer. You hear me? Every single summer." And Ghost said, "Yes, sir. Every summer, long as I'm breathing." And he meant it. Delilah still cooks for the ranch, but it's her ranch now, all 800 acres, and the hands take their hats off when she comes into the kitchen, and not one of them would ever dream of laughing at her, because they all remember exactly where they were standing the day she walked across that dirt. Bandit's got the run of the place, one horn and all, and he still follows Ghost around like a dog, and in the fall the two of them walk the peach tree together, Ghost and the woman who kissed him in front of the whole world when she had nowhere else to turn. Here's what I keep coming back to. That whole town looked at a big quiet woman and a scarred quiet man and decided they knew the whole story. One was a joke and one was a monster. That's what they'd have told you, dead certain. And they were wrong about both. Because the loudest man at that party, the handsome one with the easy grin, the one everybody wanted to stand next to and be liked by, he turned out to be the dangerous one. The thief, the liar. And the man in the 10-foot circle of empty space, the one they crossed the street to avoid, the one they whispered a dead man's story about. He was leaving peaches on a lonely woman's windowsill before the sun came up, asking for nothing in return, just so she'd have something sweet to start her long day. Delilah could have run that afternoon, could have covered her face and given them all the ending they wanted, the one where the fat girl cries and disappears. Instead, she turned and walked toward the one person in that whole crowd who'd never once looked at her like she was less. And that walk across the dirt, that one decision, made in the worst minute of her life, changed 2 lives forever. So the next time you catch yourself deciding who's the joke and who's the monster, based on a scar or a size or the way somebody keeps to himself out at the edge of things, you remember Delilah Voss in her blue dress, and you remember Ghost McCabe and his peaches. Because the kindest heart in that whole county was standing right where nobody dared to look.